Everyone, this is Teresa from Base 10 Montessori, and today we're going to go over part 2 of our Metabolic Psychiatry series, and we're talking about how to help ourselves and our students through nutritional healing. But we have to define that, and we have to define what brain food is, and that's what we started in with part 1. I'm going to put my PowerPoint slides for this video on my locals page, so that will be in the links down below in the comment section. And with that being said, let's move on. So now we're coming back to part 2 of this book, and today we're only going to cover chapters 6 and 7 of Change Your Diet, Change Your Mind by Dr. Georgia Ede. We're going to go over some key points from those 2 chapters, and if it sounds interesting to you, I'll make sure to put links down in the comment section below so you can grab a copy of this book as well. So I'll have my Amazon affiliate links down below. So once again, just to do a disclaimer for this video, this is not medical advice because I am not a doctor and I am not a health professional. Please consult your primary health practitioner or a doctor trained in a ketogenic diet before making any changes to your diet. Ketogenic diets are extremely powerful, and the more medications you are on, the more carefully you need to be watched as you begin this journey. So if you're hearing things in this video that sound really good to you and you want to try the ketogenic diet because of all these benefits we're talking about, I would just say be very careful. Go consult a medical doctor, somebody who's trained in this, and make sure that you are on the right track because the goal is to be successful. And if you do this the wrong way, you're going to feel miserable and you might not be successful. And so I want you to prepare for changing your diet in a way that's the most beneficial. As I stated in the first part of this series, I'm going to put all my favorite resources down below in the comment section. This includes the link to the book, Change Your Diet, Change Your Mind. I'm also going to put some of my favorite YouTube channels so you can look for more information on this topic. And I'll put some of my favorite tools for health and wellness in the comment section down below with my Amazon affiliate link. So this book has 4 parts to it, but we are only going to discuss the first 2 parts of this book. And so I'm going to do 3 videos just on these first 2 parts. And if you like what we're doing here, I would encourage you to go buy the book and read more of it because I think it's a really great book. And I think it's really helpful for educators as we're looking at our students from a holistic approach. We want to see them as a whole being, and what they eat and how it affects their moods is really important to observe. And we know that there's a lot of links between behavior and food. And so that's what I want you to think about as we go through this series. So with that being said, let's jump into part 2. And today we're only going over chapters 6 and 7, which talks about our descent into dietary madness. So chapter 6 is titled The Perils of Processed Foods, and this talks about inflammation and oxidative stress. And if you're somebody who is tracking what they eat, if you're very concerned with what you are feeding yourself and your family, this is going to really open your eyes to all the things that have been going on in the world of food that maybe we haven't been paying attention to. Maybe science hasn't been paying attention to this aspect of food, which is eating fats and proteins, and just how destructive sugar is to our bodies and our brains. So on page 88, she talks about processed foods, and she says, we now live in an era of ultra-processed products that would be wholly unrecognizable to our ancestors as food. Ultra-processed foods make up nearly 40% of what Australians choose to consume, about 50% of the food families in the UK purchase, and more than 60% of what Americans buy at the store. And it is a little bit scary when you think about that because we are now eating so much ultra processed foods rather than something that comes farm to table. And I know that for a lot of people out there, you're working really hard to make positive changes, but it's really expensive, right? It gets really expensive. I know about 10 years ago when I was doing the raw food diet, I was doing really well. I lost a lot of weight. So just getting off those ultra processed foods is really helpful. And if you're doing that already, that's great. But for me, I discovered I was missing a key component. I was missing the component of using ketones as my fuel source, and I was eating too many carbs. Even as a vegan or a raw vegan, you can eat a lot of carbs and a lot of sugar. Just because it's plant-based doesn't mean the sugar doesn't count. It can still affect your brain, but I will say that you are going to make a lot of improvements to your health just by switching from processed foods to unprocessed foods. So I think that's important to point out that if you do a diet that's different than a ketogenic diet, but you're just getting off the processed foods, you still will see a positive results. However, there's something special about the ketogenic diet that uses that switches us from going from a glucose-based energy system to a ketone-based energy system. And that has a remarkable difference on the brain. And I think that's really important to point out. That's what this research is covering. So on page 90, 91, and 92, she starts talking about refined carbohydrates. She says refined carbohydrates encompasses a great variety of sweet and starchy ingredients, but the king and queen of this realm, unquestionably, are flour and sugar. All refined carbohydrates begin life as components of whole plant foods, which are then refined into sugars and starches. And then on page 92, she has this chart of sugar's many aliases. And when you look at those labels, you can better analyze how much sugar they're putting in it, like dextrins, crystals, solids, saccharides, etc. So she has that chart on page 92 that shows you all the different labels that actually are sugar. Starting on page 96, she talks about oxidative stress and inflammation, and she says high glucose levels jeopardize the brain health by promoting excessive oxidation and inflammation. Surplus sugar gloms onto the protein, fats, and even the DNA strands inside your cells, disfiguring and crippling them beyond repair. Then she says it is now well established that chronic brain inflammation plays a significant role in many psychiatric disorders. The scientific evidence tying inflammation to depression is especially robust. She says levels of inflammatory cytokines tend to be higher in people with mood and psychotic disorders. Researchers can even give people depression by giving them medicines that raise their inflammatory cytokine levels. And then she says inflammatory cytokines disrupt normal production of serotonin and glutamate, key neurotransmitters involved in mood and psychotic disorders. And so we're starting to see this research come in that's showing the link between sugar and mood, sugar and cognitive function. And so we can tie this inflammation back to sugar. And to think about that, when you are having brain fog, when you are having some mood issues, it could also be linked to inflammation in the brain. And we've all seen those Snickers commercials, right? Where they say, "You're not you when you're hungry." And then they eat a Snickers and suddenly they're all better, they're all fixed. Now, first of all, we know that this is propaganda from sugar companies, right? But it's highly effective propaganda because it's built on this idea that once your glucose, your sugar levels go down, you crash, right? That is destabilizing. And so you need more glucose to stabilize your energy, right? To stabilize your mood. And so there is some truth behind that, but that's also very damaging because sugar does not have to be the only source of fuel. In fact, when you use protein and you use fat for your fuel and you cut out the sugar, you're running on either ketones or gluconeogenesis. There's two different ways to create energy. And so you either pull from the protein or you pull from the fat for your energy, and that is more stabilizing, where sugar, the glucose, goes up and down and up and down, and you constantly have to be refueling. And so that's the difference between the two different fuel systems and why your mood can go up and down when you are running on sugar. Now let's talk about refined vegetable oils. She says, we have long been told that vegetable oils such as soybean and sunflower oil are good for us. But these oils are now coming under increasing scrutiny for their potential role in the decline of our mental and physical health. She says we've been conditioned to divide fats into saturated and unsaturated categories for so long that learning to divide them into refined and unrefined categories may take a little practice. The fats that exist naturally in any whole plant or animal food are unrefined. Examples include fatty pork chop, an olive, or a macadamia nut. The traditional processing methods used to extract these natural fats, such as cooking pork to render lard or cold pressing olives to make extra virgin olive oil, don't change their chemical structure considerably. And then she says you can't, however, wrangle oil out of soybeans or sunflower seeds simply by cooking them on the stove or squeezing them with all your might. And so now we need to look at fat in a new way. We need to look at fat differently, not in terms of saturated and unsaturated, she says, but in terms of refined and unrefined. What takes the least amount of processing? What occurs naturally? And so when we start looking at our fat from that viewpoint, we can start evaluating the quality of our oils. This brings us to the topic of linoleic acid. And so on page 100, she starts talking about the linoleic acid problem. And she says one of the biggest problems with vegetable oil is that most of them are exceedingly high in linoleic acid. And she said linoleic acid is naturally found in small quantities in a wide variety of whole plant and animal foods. We consume 3 to 6 times more linoleic acid now than we did a century ago. The result of having consumed vegetable oils in mayonnaise, salad dressings, chips, fries, margarines, and countless other ultra-processed foods for decades is that our fat cells, which are designed to store saturated fat, not polyunsaturated fat, are slowly filling up with linoleic acid. If your diet is too high in linoleic acid, you may have more trouble making the omega-3 fatty acids. And she says most of us consume at least 20 times more omega-6 as omega-3, shifting our entire system toward inflammation and away from healing. So once again, the type of fat that you're eating does matter. So we don't want to eat fats that come through an unnatural process. We don't want to eat fats that cause inflammatory issues. And we do have to consider the amount of omega-6 that we have in comparison to omega-3. So all of this still matters. The type of fat you're eating still matters. But we've been sold a lot of lies along the way about what fats are healthy for us. And in fact, many of the seed oils that we've been using for cooking could actually be very inflammatory. On page 104, she starts talking about inflammation, oxidative stress, and neurotransmitter imbalances. And she says the increased inflammation and oxidative stress caused by refined carbohydrates and vegetable oils can also contribute to psychiatric problems by throwing your neurotransmitters out of balance. Nutrition policymakers around the world continue to recommend that we consume 2 to 10% of our daily calories as linoleic acid. So here we have our health guidelines working against us. We're finding that there's a lot of inflammation and oxidative stress in carbohydrates and vegetable oils, and yet the policymakers around nutrition are still recommending it. So they are behind the curve of science on this one. And so we need to be rethinking the types of fat we eat and the amount of carbs that we are eating. And maybe eating a Snickers when we're hungry is not the solution. Let's go into chapter 7 now and talk about metabolic mayhem, the invisible hormone roller coaster. Let's talk about sugar as a mood destabilizer. She says, if your glucose is falling too fast, or from too great a height, your glucose-hungry brain will wisely view your plummeting glucose as an emergency and respond by commanding your body to release a cocktail of hormones into your bloodstream. Glucagon and adrenaline take care of the falling glucose issues, but adrenaline does much more than raise blood glucose. It is a powerful stress hormone. Eating too many of the wrong carbohydrates too often can send insulin soaring, setting off various cycles of hunger, overeating, and mood swings. In addition to adrenaline, falling glucose triggers the release of another stress hormone called cortisol. So now you can start to see this destabilization pattern that happens with sugar, right? And this is something that I noticed when I switched from carbohydrates to ketones. When I started switching from sugar to fuel my energy to ketones to fuel my energy, there was a lot more stability, and those hunger hormones, those rise and fall of hunger issues and mood issues that were related to eating or not eating, really started to disappear. And as somebody who's always struggled with binge eating in my life and always struggling with feeling hungry all the time, this was a huge shift for me. And so I noticed that I could go a day without eating and feel fine, that it's really easy to fast on this diet because you're not being dictated to by the hormones. And there's a lot more research there than what we're going to get into today. If you start going down that rabbit hole on YouTube and looking up more about this, you're going to find all sorts of interesting scientific facts about how ketones stabilize those hormones and it starts helping you work through the fault signals of hunger. And then she starts talking about understanding hormonal havoc. And she says other hormones that ride on the glucose insulin roller coaster include appetite hormones like ghrelin, which your stomach releases to make you feel hungry, and leptin, which your fat cells release to make you feel full. Female reproductive hormones like estrogen also pay close attention to glucose and insulin levels so they can decide whether the conditions are right for pregnancy. When insulin rises, so can aldosterone, a hormone that tells your kidneys to hold on to more water and salt. This may cause you to retain fluid or even contribute to high blood pressure. So let's take a look at this hormone called ghrelin. When you start feeling hungry a little bit each day, that hunger starts seeping in, that's the hormone of ghrelin, and it's telling you to eat. And when you have a carb-based diet, when you're running on glucose and you are trying to eat all the time to keep your energy levels up, your body has this hormone it releases to make you feel hungry, even if maybe you have plenty of energy left. And so these signals can start to get all mixed up. And so that is the hormone ghrelin right there. So that's your appetite hormone. It can be conditioned, right? And that's one of those things you have to stop listening to. But when you're running on a fuel source that runs out quickly, like carbohydrates, it's hard to get that hormone under control. And so when you switch your fuel source, that hormone regulation starts to stabilize. On page 120, she starts talking about sugar, and you're going to see a lot of doctors out there, ketogenic doctors out there, talking about sugar and how addictive it is. And there are some that say that sugar is just as addictive, maybe even more so, than cocaine. That this is a very powerful and addictive drug. A lot of people can quit cigarettes, they can quit drinking, but they can't quit sugar. So you need to find a way to eat, but you can't eat anything that causes some sort of trigger for you. And she said, after reviewing the available research in this field, scientists at the University of Bordeaux concluded that at the neurobiological level, the neural substrates of sugar and sweet reward appear to be more robust than those of cocaine. She says because sugar hijacks the hormones and neurotransmitter pathways that regulate your appetite and eating behaviors, when you are eating a diet that includes refined carbohydrates, you cannot trust your instincts. And she says, carefully examine your relationship with sugar and other addictive ultra-processed foods. And then on page 121, she lists a bunch of questions to ask yourself to help evaluate how your relationship with sugar is affecting you. And with that, we're going to conclude this video for today. I still have one more video coming out on this topic. We'll go through the next 2 chapters in this book, and that will be our final video on this series. So I do hope that you find this helpful, and I hope that this is something that you will consider going forward, and we'll discuss a little bit more in the next video. So with that being said, if you like what I'm doing here, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, like, share, comment, subscribe to the channel, and I will see you in the next video.